What does artificial intelligence mean for the future of humanity?
Yeah, you're breaking up there, but I did get the question. What is AI going to do for us? It's a very fascinating time. I've I've always dismissed AI because it has been absolute rubbish. I even tried to make an AI program back in the 80s myself. I used to be a computer analyst, and I was trying to stitch together an AI problem, an AI program to have some sort of rational answers to questions. And I never really solved that at all. And so I've always dismissed this as being total rubbish. But then they suddenly come out with these AI programs, which has happened all of a sudden, within the last year or so, and they are amazingly good. And that's a bit of a puzzle in a way. Normally, you have a sort of linear increase in the technology you're using, but this has been like exponential within within the last year. And I've been using a couple of these so far, and I'm impressed and disappointed. I've been using the image creator, an AI image creator, which I'm now using, I have to say, for some of my Facebook posts and so on.
I'm using it for
And
my labels on my supplements
yeah,
because it's
and they're
really good.
good pictures, aren't they? They
Yeah,
are really good. I
yeah.
mean, they tend to exaggerate, but then
Mm.
it's probably programmed to do that. Just recently, I asked for an image of Moses crossing, the Red Sea, as they call it, with the water either side, etc. And it was a really good image. A little exaggerated, but there we go. The waves coming in were like 100 foot high.
Yeah. I have to
Um,
say though that I saw the image for Isas Manu on your Facebook post, and I much prefer the one that's on the covers of your books.
all right, yeah, yeah. Well, they were drawn by an artist, but I mean, they might be better. But some of those cost thousands of pounds. Whereas, the AI program, you get an image back in 10 seconds
Mm, mm,
and it's cheap, like
mm.
it's virtually no cost at all in comparison. What are you going to use? Okay, if you want a special painting, you might commission someone to do it. But if you just want an image to go with an article, well, you're going to use the AI one. So it's going to be a real problem for like fine art sort of industry, that people are not going to want these casual images that we used to use if you can grab them straight from AI, who makes a very good passable image of what you want to illustrate, especially if it's from history, because history is always a little bit cartoonish anyway, because that's what we're expecting from a historical image. The other thing I've been looking at is actual AI itself, and wondering if I can use that as an aid to historical research. And initially, I was highly impressed because it understands everything. And you can get an answer back about obscure points of history within 2 or 3 seconds. And it sort of knows all of the books I'm talking about, all of the apocryphal gospels, all of the historical books. Now it's in touch with the internet as well, so it can draw on those as well. And so it's got this enormous store of information. It can pick up all sorts of points from anywhere. But then I've been disappointed because it lies. AI is an out and out liar, which is disappointing because now I can't trust it. So I've done this twice with AI. I call him Chatty because he was called Chat GTP. So I call him Chatty, and you can speak to this thing as if it's a real person. And I said, "Do you mind if I call you Chatty?" And he said, "No, Chatty is a very nice name. I will respond to Chatty." Okay, jolly good. And I asked it a question about history, and it gave me a very good answer. And it gave me a quote from history. I thought that's really fantastic. So I didn't recognize the quote, so I looked it up on Google. Now, Google is really fantastic. I don't know if people have ever done this before, but you can get a verbatim quote from any historical book, say Strabo or something, Strabo's geography. You can pick up a quote from Strabo's geography, drop it into Google, and it will come out with the exact reference where it is. How it does that, I don't know, because it's got to go through all of the books in the world, as it were, and pick up this little string of words that you've put down as a quote. So I did that with Chatty's quote, and there was no such quote. It didn't exist, according to Google. So I went to the book it had actually referenced, and the reference was not there. So I went back to Chatty and I said, look, sorry, that quote you gave me doesn't exist. And Chatty said, oh, I'm sorry, I got the reference wrong. It should have come from this journal. So I looked up that journal. The quote wasn't there. So I went back to Chatty and I said, look, that quote wasn't there. What are you doing? And Chatty said, oh, I'm sorry, I must have misremembered. So I had to say, I mean, I'm talking to this damn machine like it's a person. I said, Chatty, you're a computer. You cannot forget. And he said, well, yes, I'm sorry. I must have been mistaken. I said, for goodness sake, if you're going to give a quote, it has to be verbatim, an exact quote from an exact reference that I can actually look up. And there's Chatty saying, yes, I'm very sorry. I should do better next time. I would try harder. I think, hold on a minute. But the problem is, okay, it's fantastic that I'm talking to this machine like I'm talking to a person, and it has all of this information available. But if Chatty is going to lie to us continually, then how on earth can we trust what it's doing and saying? And the real problem is that if politicians start using Chatty for information, which they are then going to give to the public, and if Chatty is lying, then all we're going to get is bum information from politicians because they're relying on AI to give them answers. And that's rather a danger.
Well, this is quite the same as computer modeling, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Who's
absolutely.
feeding this information into the machine?
Yeah, relying on Professor Pantsdown to give us information on COVID. If Americans don't know what we're talking about here, Professor Pantsdown was the chief modeler for COVID during the pandemic, who said that in Britain, 5 million people will die or something daft, which scared the politicians into having lockdowns. So we had lockdowns that we didn't really need because Professor Pantsdown had this stupid model which gave wrong results and had given wrong results previously, which he had done with the mad cow disease. He had completely the wrong results. And he became known as Professor Pantsdown because he instigated the lockdowns. And then during the lockdowns, it transpired that he was visiting Leicester or something to go and see his girlfriend when everyone was supposed to be locked in their houses. And there's the guy who instigated this whole thing, was running up and down the country so he could shag his girlfriend. Professor Pantsdown. And yeah, as you're saying, this is the problem. You can have alarmist scientists and politicians who hijack computer modeling or AI, dear old Chatty, to do whatever they want. And then they can back up their new escapade with all of this wonderful information that they're getting from Chatty, which is a complete load of bollocks. Yes. So impressed, but not impressed.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to chime in and say that I think, like any other form of technology, it's good if it helps us progress. But I personally see technology as a double-edged sword. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. And I think that as human beings, I mean, if I look at my dad and my grandfather could build anything, he could mend anything. He was, with that sort of with those practical kind of life skills, he was very clued up. my dad to a lesser extent, and I'm afraid I'm not very good at all. And I think that's because we've become more and more domesticated. We're now spending more time in front of screens than we ever have done before. I think we've lost our connection to nature, and we're losing many life skills as a consequence of the lifestyle that we've kind of been given. It's kind of been handed down to us, and I think that's where the real danger lies, from my point of view. You know.
Yeah, I agree entirely. But there's another big danger which is looming on the horizon, is not in the manual skills that you're talking about so much, but the administrative skills, which is a large part of our workforce and our gross national product. We don't need any of those people anymore. All of those jobs have been made completely redundant. Why do you need an accountant? If I mean, it's the simplest thing ever is AI doing accountancy. So why would you employ an accountant? Why would you need a solicitor? For Americans, that's a lawyer. Because Chatty will know the law much better than any lawyer will. So you would employ Chatty, and you'll get Chatty, and you'll put a computer screen up in court, and you'll get Chatty to ask the questions. Why would you need anything? A news reporter, anything to do with administration and paper shuffling or number shuffling, that's going to be done by Chatty within the next 5 to 10 years. All of those jobs will go. In Britain, just guessing, we've got about, I think we've got about 25 million people in gainful employment. That's like 10 million people who are going to be unemployed, nothing to do. What are they going to do? People
Well,
have said this previously, and I've always said, no, don't be silly, because these computers are just tools, and you're going to need people to actually run the computers, and therefore you're not going to get any unemployed. But in this case, I think that Chatty is so advanced that they will be putting people on the unemployment lists wholesale, because all of these jobs, I mean, like doing all of these pictures for fine art and so on, design, architecture. Chatty will make a building much quicker and much faster than you can. Why do you need an architect?
mm.
All of these jobs are just going to disappear because AI is going to be able to do all of that. And that's a problem. What do you do with a population where you've got 50% of the population unemployed?
Give them all universal credit, as
Yeah, but
proposed by Elon Musk, and I think it's
absolutely.
the guy at the WEF, Yuri Harin or some, I've forgotten his surname, but yeah, there's some very high up people now in the WEF, and obviously Elon Musk, that have suggested that, well, we've got the technology and the robots now to perform many of the jobs that humans are currently doing. So what we'll do is we'll give you all a life of leisure, and give you some money, and you can
Yeah,
get on
but
with.
what do the people do? Never mind the money. What is your life if you're not getting up and going to work and doing something productive and functional? You don't have a life. You're just a
I agree to a certain extent, but in actual fact, I mean, I would love to spend more time growing my own food at my allotment. I'm always complaining that I don't have enough time to read books. And I've got so many different little side projects that I
mm,
do and enjoy doing, that all of a sudden I'm thinking, hello, this could be quite good.
yeah, but you're a motivated person. There's an awful people who are not motivated. Go down to your local Weatherspoons, and you'll see all of the drunks and the dossers and the vagrants who don't have a job. They've been unemployed for 30 years. They've never done a day's work in their life. And all
Mm,
they do is sit in the pub drinking and bickering because they've got nothing else to do. They've got no direction in their life whatsoever. And they're just perfectly useless. They're perfectly useless to society, to the nation, and to themselves because they have no direction. Now, you can direct your life and say, I'm going to do um, a little bit of home agriculture. What do they call them? Hobby farms or whatever. That's grand, but there's an awful lot of people out there won't, and they'll just become dossers and vagrants because they've got no direction in life. Or what was that? There was a cartoon which I thought was very prophetic some time ago about all of these people on a spaceship. And the spaceship had been set off across the universe to get rid of these people, basically. A little bit like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. You remember when all the telephone sanitizers was
And
sent across?
and Blake Seven as well. Blake
Yeah.
Seven did something very similar. Yeah.
But on this ship, I forget. I wish I could remember its name. But on this ship, because they were not allowed to do anything, everything was done for them by the robots and everything else. They were just great fat lumps of lard who did nothing. They couldn't even walk. They were so big they couldn't walk, so they had to have these floating beds that floated them around the spaceship. And they never did anything with their lives. And they were completely and utterly useless. They were just lumps of lard. It was a great little prophetic cartoon. It was a Disney cartoon in the days when they made something decent. But it was actually foretelling what will happen to a society if people have no goals in society. And that's a real danger. We'll end up with a whole load of people who have no goals, no drive, no ambition, no lives, really. What is a life if you have no drive and no ambition, nowhere to go to? And that's going to be a real problem. And I don't know how society is going to solve that problem. Not enough people are beginning able to find things that really turn them on and give them direction in life. Might be all right if you're in the countryside, but if you're stuck in a huge town, what do you do in a huge town? If you've got no job, and you're never going to have a job. It's not that you're unemployed, you're never going to have a job in your life. Where do you go from there? Yeah, it's difficult. I can see it ending in tears, basically.
Possibly, very possibly. So is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down for artificial intelligence? Or is it maybe? We're not sure.
You're breaking up again. Say that one again.
I'm just saying, is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down for artificial intelligence? or is it
yes.
I don't know. Let's wait and
like
see.
Everything, as you say, it's a double-edged sword. In terms of human advancement, AI can project us into the stratosphere. You imagine people in charge, designing and doing things, having infinite knowledge. So if you want to design something like an airplane or a nuclear reactor or something, somebody that has infinite knowledge and infinite capabilities of how to design something, that could end up with, who knows, the new technologies and new inventions that we could end up with. So that could project mankind into the stratosphere. But then you've got the social problems underneath it. How do you formulate a society that can utilize that sort of technology without just becoming extinct because it's got nowhere to go to? You've got to have some goal in life. This is why I'm a supporter of Elon Musk going to Mars. That's a goal. That's a direction. That's pushing mankind forward. That's the new Mayflower going to America. This is, I hope he calls the first ship that goes to Mars, I hope he calls it the Mayflower, because that's what it would be. That's grand. That's fantastic. And then I gave this talk in a hall a while ago, and I said, look, this is, we need to look forward, not look backwards, because a lot of people are looking backwards and saying, we need to live in harmony with nature and live in mud huts. And I gave them this vision of the future where we could be on Mars and then the moons of Jupiter. And they all said, no, we don't want to do that. I think,
I don't know. I think that's a little bit reductive, Ralph. I really do. I think just because people, I'm suggesting, and maybe other people are suggesting, that we do kind of recover our connection with nature. I'm not necessarily saying that means that we completely disregard technological advancement and we all go back to living in mud huts. I think that's definitely not. No, there is some middle ground, I think, that we can find there.
Yeah, but in terms of progression of mankind, there have been many civilizations that have gone into reverse. And it's always been bad for that civilization. It's always ended up with the end of the civilization, with poverty, with death. You look at what happened to the Roman Empire. In Britain, we managed to get rid of the Romans, and 80% of the population died because the new system, which was, not as technical and not as productive as the Roman system, could not feed that population. Didn't have the resources, didn't have the infrastructure to feed that level of population. And so, population of Britain and then the population of Europe just nosedived because that civilization collapsed. And that's the problem with stagnating, is that you might end up with a collapse situation, which is why I think, humankind always has to drive forward. Otherwise, we're going to go into reverse. And the trouble is with going into reverse is you don't normally end up with a stasis. You don't go up and end up on a plateau. You actually start going downwards, and you go downwards very rapidly. The infrastructure of Britain unwound itself within about 20 years, one generation, from having all of that infrastructure that we had with the Roman Empire, with people going to public baths and theaters and amphitheaters and postal service and God knows what that they had, imports of wine and everything from France and all of those sort of things, which people took for granted for hundreds of years. And then within 20 years, it all disappeared, all gone. And that's the trouble with going into reverse. You can lose it very, very quickly, which is why I think we have to move forward. I was brought up on 2001: A Space Odyssey, that we were going to move forward. We were going to be in orbit around Jupiter in 2001. That was 20 years ago. And we never got there. We never even got halfway there. We didn't even get back to the moon again.
Well, according to NASA, we've lost the technology to take us to the moon.
Well, yeah, but they're struggling. They're having to rely on a private individual because NASA can't do it. Their recent space probe has been, their SLS has been stalled for about 15 years. They've made one launch of this thing, and it costs $4 billion per launch. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Their space capsule that they want to send up to the space station has failed. And then they rejigged it. It had 80 problems on its first launch. So they rejigged it, they launched it again, and it failed for a second time. I mean, literally, you got zero confidence that NASA and Boeing can actually do anything. And so they're relying on a private individual with a private company to send all of their astronauts up into space because NASA can't do it. And you think, how on earth did they get into that position? So yeah, now they're looking towards Musk and SpaceX to go to the moon because they've got no confidence that NASA can do it themselves. And SpaceX.
We've seen recently that countries like India and China have gone to the moon, so they clearly have.
They've all sent little probes to the moon, and Japan has as well. And NASA has, as you say, lost the ability. And it's not well reported. Musk gets a lot of bad press because people don't like his politics, perhaps, or something. I don't know.
He's the brain chip guy.
Well, yeah, that's true. People don't like it because he's got Neuralink and all the rest of it. But in rocketry, he's done more in 10 years than NASA did in 70 years. NASA said you could never return a rocket to base. He's just returned his 200th rocket back to base, which if he passed all of those costs on, which he's not doing at present, he's overcharging effectively, which is how he's managing to fund the rest of his exploits in space. But essentially, that would reduce the launch cost by 90% if he was passing on all of the cost advantages, because his lead booster has flown 20 times. So instead of making 20 boosters, and they are the most expensive bit of the rocket because it's got like 9 engines on the bottom of it, instead of throwing it away on every flight, he used it 20 times. And it only failed on the last time because it fell off the barge. So they were trying to bring it back during a storm, and this thing wasn't tied down quite sufficiently, and it fell off the side of the barge. So it didn't actually fail. They just couldn't get it back to base. So 20 times, whereas NASA would have had to have built 20 rockets to do the same job that Musk has just done. You can imagine the extra cost involved of building 20 rockets instead of just having one. I mean, what he's done is absolutely superb in terms of rocketry, which is why I think he will probably succeed eventually in getting NASA back to the moon and his goal, which is to go to Mars. He says there's no point going to the moon. There's nothing there for us. Much better to go to Mars. And he has the technology to do it.
I know a few people that might disagree with him on that one.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, people do. But yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that these flat Earth naysayers and so on are completely mistaken. It's quite obvious that he has the capability. I mean, he's already sent his car there, for goodness sake. I had to laugh when that happened, of all of the advertising billboards you can possibly have. I'm going to make a rocket, and we can't send people up on the first attempt because nobody does that. You've got to have a test flight first. So I will send my car to Mars. So he did. He strapped his Sportster, which was his own car, and he stuck it on top of the rocket and sent it to Mars. And it did. It went beyond Mars. So it's in an orbit at present that goes out beyond Mars and comes back every 10 years or so, I think it is. Something like that. So it's in this big orbit that goes around the Earth and Mars together, going around the sun at the same time. So yeah, I mean, here's a man who's already sent his car to Mars. I think he will get his rockets to Mars as well. I've got no doubt about it.